So yeah, thanks Mitch for that overview. I know your GDC talk inspired a lot of us at SpaceApe to rethink this, and on behalf of everyone on the brutal buy side of this equation, any efforts to increase inventory is great by us. So thanks. So topic of there's my clock. Okay. So topic of my talk was building an analytics stack. A little bit about us. SpaceApe, I'm the COO and founder, based in London. We're about a 100-people studio, 3 years old, split across 4 game teams, 2 live, Samurai Siege, which is just celebrated its 2-year birthday, and Rival Kingdoms, which is about 4 months old. Both in the combat city builder genre, yeah, we very much depend on live ops and content releases to give these games longevity. So yeah, we'll be putting new events, new content every week, and so the games really depend on strong analytics infrastructure. So yeah, so when George pitched me about coming in and giving this talk, is really referencing a talk that we gave in London about 5 or 6 months ago, where we opened the kimono on our analytics stack. When I was trying to figure out how to make a 15-minute version of that, it got a little bit tricky, and so I thought I'd talk about 1 or 2 topics within it, within that presentation. But if anyone's interested in getting the full deck, just Google SpaceApe Analytics Stack. It's the first 3 results up. It's about a 60-page PowerPoint presentation, and I go through all the details of how we arrived at our current stack. But in there you'll see beautiful graphs such as this one, which show the architecture. And really the point of that talk was to show how we evolved from a 12-person startup who really couldn't afford to put too much investment into analytics at all, yet knew that it was important, through to the 100-person company. And really, when we started, we just had a basic Swerve implementation in Samurai Siege in beta. And as we grew, we kind of evolved it. So at the start, we made sure that we still had all the raw events dumped in an S3 bucket somewhere. So we knew it was time to hire an analyst when myself and the product managers were spending more time scraping those logs to answer questions. And then we hired a data engineer who started building the ETL processes and outsourced a bunch of stuff, and eventually grew it into a larger stack. But the main point is we only built what we needed at the time, but with an eye to what we need in the future. In that deck, you also see a breakdown of our single-player view. So if you're trying to write up all the event taxonomies for your game right now, trying to figure out what you should track, this is a good reference to. You could probably reverse engineer our event structures and tags from this deck. So encourage you to have a look. Key takeaways were something that you didn't see much 2 years ago when we did this. Make sure you keep ownership of your raw event logs. So if you're using a vendor, make sure you have access to it so you can then build on top of that. And only build what you need, and make sure that raw data is accessible throughout the whole company. And so a lot of the innovations and the shortcuts that we took on data were a result of everyone having access to it and riffing on that. So for example, our CRM system, our player profile system, was a result of one of the server devs just seeing that this information was there and trying to make it more easy to interface with. One of the topics that came out of that presentation that I get a lot of follow-up questions on was one of the ways that this data enabled us to do some pretty interesting marketing techniques. This is a screenshot from the very first beta of Samurai Siege, our first game, when it was live in New Zealand. It's pretty embarrassing UI right now, but we put it live early to get feedback. And on this screenshot, you can see a hint of probably our most effective marketing channel that we stumbled across. More effective than the UA arbitrage that we invest a lot of money in, more effective than the featuring that we got, great as it was. And that's that little blue button in the corner. And it wasn't obvious at the time, but the state of customer support in mobile was atrocious at the time. It was impossible to get a response from any developer, really, for good reason. And what we did is we didn't have any grand strategy on this, but we wanted to test a bunch of features. We're introducing alliance wars and some different event formats, and we really didn't know whether it was going to work. We wanted a cheap way of getting feedback. So we whacked this button up there, and I was responding to the emails. And in the first week, it became very obvious that we're onto something. I would reply to someone who said, oh, you should do X, Y, and Z. And I'd reply, and then I'd get a response back almost immediately going, oh my God, I can't believe the developer replied. I didn't even say I was. If I said I was the founder of the company, it would have blown their mind. But the fact that anyone in the company even responded to them was mind-blowing. And so a week or so went by, and then we started diving into all of our top players and the alliances that were on the leaderboards. And we saw a very clear pattern with people who had contacted us, had a good experience, were blown away by the fact the developer really cared about what players said, and then went and recruited all their friends. And so we saw a very strong correlation between positive engagements through this feedback button and ultimately spend in the game. So much so that in the first 6 months of the game's lifetime, about 20% of our revenue was attributable to people who had had good experiences with customer support. Now, that could be, this is a pretty loose data. There's a lot of causation versus correlation questions over this, but we believe that we were onto something, and we really invested a lot in support and community, and it's something we continue to do today. Some of the ways this manifested were people who were big spenders in other games or influential in other games came along and wanted to support us as a developer who listened. Other ways it would manifest would be people who were on the verge of giving up over an issue, obviously the classic customer support resolution type problem, but all tied back to this feedback button. So going back to one of the uses we put to the data was we made sure that every CS ticket that came in was augmented with all of this CRM profiling and propensity data. So when someone wrote into us from the game, any agent who picked it up can see, obviously, the usual metrics around spend level and activity engagement, but also stuff that the user couldn't see, such as crash logs that they may not have known were being stored, and which help the agents diagnose the problem, but also their propensity to churn, their propensity to spend, where they were in their life cycle, whether they associated with other valuable players. And that really helped us triage the tickets, because once we got to about 10,000 daily users in our beta, it was impossible to, our CS couldn't handle that with the grand headcount of 1. So we had to triage, and so what we found is we were funneling people through to have a good experience that the data was telling us would be more valuable, and so that was one of the ways that once we were able to hook up all of the systems with our CS agent tools, it became really powerful. Another tool at our disposal was our in-house customer profiling section. So when a ticket came in, you could easily open up and see all of the interactions that player had had. Initially, it didn't look anything like this. It was more like 4 fields. But what we did, continuing the spirit of making sure those raw event logs are available to everyone, we would just, one of those fields was a JSON dump of everything about the player's profile. One of them was a logstash link. So more technical people could investigate things, and then over time we tooled it up a bit better. So this is my profile in Samurai Siege. So one thing we said then is, look, how do we scale this? This is clearly something that was working for us at a very small scale with a very small number of users in beta. How can we blow this up? Hired 4 or 5 people. We decided, okay, we'll try and make a community forum out of it. Turns out this was a complete waste of our time. It was very valuable for the small number of people that engaged with forums, but what we learned was actually our most valuable and our most viral and our most influential players, we're not going to go to forums. It's a pretty strange experience if you're not a forum player. They also will not really engage with their friends, so you couldn't really track this virality. But what they were all using was chat apps to keep in touch with each other. So this is stepping outside the realms of the data, but it's one of the things that the data informed us on to lead us down this path. When we started in this genre, the top 1,000 or so spenders in the genre, they were very viral. They were keeping in touch with their friends, but they were friends they met in the game. And about 13% of them were using Line, 11% of them were using WeChat, and Kik and other chat apps are up there as well. Fast forward a year, nearly 30 or 40% of these people were online. And so that led us to scrap the forums and create live line chat groups where if you qualify as a player according to our data, you get invited to these rooms where you've got basically 24/7 live chat support, and that is our community. So rather than have forums, all of our community efforts are geared around these chat rooms in applications that our players are already residing in. So we call it our VIP program. It's staffed by country managers. They run localized events. They give sneak peeks and access to information. And when a player is in that category of that we have marked as needing or warranting more investment, then that status is visible to all agents. So we have different tiers, and that's visible all throughout every time they contact us. Another data point, as a result of this program, these are some stats from our beta when we were testing Rival Kingdoms in March. You see there we've got about 5,000 DAU during this period, and we're live in 4 countries. When you actually add up those numbers, it comes to about 4,000 DAU. The other 20% of people playing in our beta were changing their countries to get access to the beta, and that gets even bigger when you look at revenue. So a lot of those people were calling up iTunes support, changing their payment methods, finding people with gift cards, and actually the majority of our revenue is coming from people outside the beta countries. And when we approached these people and asked them what they were doing and why they were doing it, the answer in almost every case was, we're supporting Space Ape as a developer because they listen to us, they really value our players and feedback. And so tying that all back to the initiative that started off in our beta, it was one of the main reasons people were going through, jumping through a lot of hoops to get access to our game in the beta. So that was it. Please, oh yeah, old-fashioned customer service works is the main takeaway. We do see the effect in virality, particularly amongst high-value players. It does get harder as you scale. So at the size we're at now, it's hard. It was pretty easy to know that we should put 2 or 3 people on this. Knowing whether you should put 5, 10, 20 or more people on it, that's a much harder question to answer. And yeah, that's it really. I'm out of time. I think I'm out of time. It's pretty hard to read this. I might have 2 minutes left. Or I might be 1 minute over. I'm not sure. 1 minute. I've got a minute. I've got a minute worth of questions if anyone wants to ask. Far away.
What did you ask behind the feedback button? What did you say or ask?
We've been through a few different evolutions of this. Initially, it was just an email that we pre-populated with session information that the client could gain, in particular the user ID. We then evolved that to some very broad, I've got a problem, I want to make a suggestion. I can't remember what the third category is. In Rival Kingdoms, we have a pretty sophisticated system now where we have 6 or 7 categories which are filtered based on your life stage. But yeah, we really try and funnel technical questions here, feedback and suggestions. We try to send people through to a form with a drop-down list, that kind of thing. But it's something we're optimizing all the time. But yeah, the classic examples, I've got a suggestion, I want some help, I can't pay, that kind of thing. But the real valuable ones are people who have suggestions. Time for one more question, I guess? Or not? Yeah. Right.
Hi. How do you do the attribution from sort of like these social chat apps to an actual sort of like revenue, for example?
Yeah, so we can't do that. What we do is we do an attribution of people we invite to join. So all of our community rooms are invite only. It is technically possible for players to invite players, but we make sure we always identify who they are. So it's a manual tagging process. We've got about, I don't know what the last count was, between 4,000 and 5,000 people in this program, and we have them tagged in the back end across both games.